So the idea, now that we are together, I mean, almost everyone in the room represents a member, either individual or corporate member. So I think the purpose of these meetings is not only to listen from people from the outside, so to speak, but also to learn from each other. So for the next hour, again, the idea is to share insights. We have I would say, semi-fixed plan for the next hour, but we're flexible and open to, let us go maybe often in other directions that we had intended, as long as it contributes to learning and to benefiting everyone. So if I would invite you to think about if there's one great idea, one great experience, something that you think would be relevant to this audience that maybe during the next hour or so, let me know, and you can have the microphone and you can share that insight with the rest of us. Before we start with that, we have, as I said, we have some plans for the next hour, so don't worry. I'm not going to pick on anyone on you yet. We've asked one of our members, namely EY, Ernst & Young, EY, from Norway, to share with us some of their thoughts about membership and why they decided to join this community. So I'd like to start off giving the word to Torbjørn, and then we'll move on and into other directions afterwards. Okay?
We discuss strategy execution and performance management with our clients every day. And we get two questions. Can you guess the two questions that we get? First is, what is the best practice? What's best practice in performance management? And the other question is, who should we talk to? Obviously, they should talk to me. I'm a consultant and I'm trying to sell them some services. But it's a lot better if I can talk to other companies similar to in the same industry and to learn from each other. And that's why I think that BBRT is a fantastic place where we can share knowledge and where they can meet other companies. So what we do is that we recommend, or we are going to recommend BBRT as a great place for networking and to learn. I have had the great chance I've been around for a long time, Bjarte. We met at a conference where we were both speaking about 40 or 50 years ago, and we've it's been very interesting to see how this network has developed. Before EY, I used to work with a department in finance in the government, but before that I used to work with Deloitte, and I was heading a global Center of Excellence for Performance and Risk Management, developing the methodology. And what I've seen is that all the consultancies, we are very good at implementing different tools. We have tools, we have forecasting, where we try to implement things around what type of information you should have to run your business. Forecasting, we have balanced scorecard, we have different kinds of take KPIs. And then we work on how you should gear up your organization to have responsibility and accountability and all that stuff. And then we deal with processes, strategy, planning, reporting, etc., intervention. And we deal a lot with technology. All of these four aspects, they are fairly easy to implement. I mean, it's just to develop a model, and then you can implement it. The difficult thing is to actually get the people motivated and to do it. And this is where I think that Beyond Budgeting has some kind of a holistic approach. And the latest a trend, or what should I say, the combination of HR and finance, I think, is really, really crucial. So this is my motivation, at least, to be a member. and to invite all our clients and to this to gain more insight and to learn from each other. So I think this is really, really good. Do you agree? We get to have some kind of enthusiasm, right? I think it's really, really fantastic what you've done, Bjarte and Anders and Robin and Peter over these years. Okay, any questions? I'm always depressed after being to a meeting like this when I look into my own. I'm head of one of our consulting units, and I try to think beyond budgeting at my internally at EY. I think we are fairly good in terms of we do not have budgets. Of course, we have some budgets, but we're not focused on budgets. We are focused on we trust our people, and that they should make their own decisions. But I think that we have a fairly long way to go in terms of being really able to, because we have lots of KPIs, you see, and that's the thing I think is very difficult for consultancies, that you have KPIs for, you have revenues, and you have all these KPIs and utilization, chargeability, etc. I think that's it's difficult for a sales organization to move away from those kinds of targets. Well, we have seen some examples. 2 or 3 years ago, we had a sales organization presenting here where they did not have any sales targets, I remember. It's going to be difficult to implement that in at least global EY. Anyways, any other questions? Then you know why I'm here, okay?
Thank you so much, Torbjørn. I could just add to that, because I also work as a consultant when I'm not here. And one of the things that we did away with many years ago when I joined this company was not just the budgets, but also a lot of the targets and stuff that a lot of consulting companies are full of. And we are very happy. It has liberated us a lot. We work much better together as a team, really. So this stuff works. Okay. Any other thoughts, reflections? Otherwise, I have a plan for the next speaker. One comment here, please.
Thank you, Anders. Yesterday at the implementers meeting, we were discussing resource allocation, basically. But I think there was a topic that we touched, and I think, among others, is it Tim? Yeah, you addressed it a little, that making a change does take time, and it actually does require a lot of other skills. Over the last couple of years, my major job has been to revamp our balanced scorecard performance management system. I didn't realize that I would spend 50% of my time actually trying to sell it into the organization, being a communicator instead of actually developing the system. And I think this is something we could discuss a little more, elaborate a little more on. What does it actually mean to change? What does it cost? And what type of skills do you actually need to, or who do you need to connect to within your organization in order to drive a change process?
Thank you for your sharing this with us. I'm not quite sure if that was meant as, let's discuss that now and try and solve it now. I might also interpret it as something that we might take up at another session. Of course, it sounds like a big issue, and not something that we can do in a very short time. But anyway, thanks a lot. I'll definitely keep that in mind, and if I don't, remind me. Huh? Okay. Tim, you want to build on that?
I don't want to sound controversial or anything, but one of the things we talked about last night after the meeting was, what is the scope for the BBRT? Is this a session? Is this a question I can ask now, or is it something for a later session? But what's included within the kind of beyond budgeting concept, and what's not included? Because what we talked about is that if we make it the scope of it too broad, does it devalue the kind of core concepts of what we're trying to get across? Is this new management philosophy? Is this beyond? Is it more finance related? And I just want to put that to everybody to see if we could have a little discussion on that, if that was okay.
Well, I will resist the temptation of saying what I think about that, and let others contribute and provide their interpretation.
Well, this is just my personal viewing of beyond budgeting, and as I elaborate with some people I've talked to the latest of days, I think one of the biggest constraints or the barriers for change is the budget word in beyond budgeting, because people see this, this is just finance related, and this is everything else than finance related. And I do not have a good clue on it.
Just referring to your statement in terms of how I see it, I think it's easy to observe that over the last decades the world seems to be changing faster rather than slower. So therefore, if you try to constrain beyond budgeting within a particular definition, would it not become obsolete would it not become obsolete in a short period of time as well? So even though there needs to be some guidelines, we need flexibility as well, so that as the outside world keeps changing, the philosophy and the vision of beyond budgeting adapts accordingly as well. At least that's how I've taken it.
Anyone else want to contribute to this? Otherwise, Yes, okay.
It is a good question, and I have no problem admitting that my beyond budgeting journey started out very much budget-oriented. We thought that was the goal, get rid of the budget, and that's it. But my simple learning over all these years, inspired by people in this room, is that it's everything hangs together, and the change we are after requires so much more than just addressing the budget thing. For me, the purpose of beyond budgeting is not necessarily to get rid of budgets. The purpose is to create these more agile and human organizations, because that is great for performance. And in order to do that, as we believe, we need to change traditional management. At the core of traditional management, you find the budgeting process. So in that discussion about should this be broad or narrow, I don't think we have a choice if our ambitions is to create better performance in organizations. I think this will also become a much more exciting place to be if we make it broader. We're also making it more difficult for ourselves, by all means. If it was only about getting rid of the budget, I think it would have. That is much easier than trying to have that bigger scope. But it's a fair discussion, and I appreciate the discussion, but I'm definitely on the side of this is big stuff and should be big stuff. Thanks.
It will probably not come as a surprise that I share this view completely. I think this is about the broad picture. It's about, for me, it's very much about finding ways, helping companies to make management models that are coherent, and that is based on all this great evidence that we're hearing about, and which has very much to do with about getting engagement and getting an engaged workforce. It's much broader than getting rid of the budget, to me. But it could be a good place to start.
I agree with this broader definition, but as a brand, the name budgeting in the brand maybe narrows the ambition. as I am in a business school, when we talk about beyond budgeting, every person I talk to think about getting rid of the budget. And it's difficult to explain that's not only that. So I agree with you when you say the budget in the brand maybe is a narrowing thing that we think about it. Okay.
Well, I absolutely agree. It really is. And we have given it some thought. We have had many ideas about rebranding and renaming what we do. But to date, we have not come up with a better name. But I mean, you're very welcome to help us in this on this journey, because I agree with you. It does send a somewhat limiting signal that this is about something less broad that we would like it to be.
But at the same point, beyond budgeting is, if you really want to go into the storytelling of beyond budgeting, you need to spend a lot of time on understanding the concept. When I go back home to my company and talk about beyond budgeting, the first reply be that, oh, is this about getting rid of budgets? And then I would say, read Bjarte's book, and then come back to me and discuss it with me. So anyway, it's not an easy way out of communicating just the brand anyway. You need to understand a whole lot more of this to get a grip on what this is really about. So a brand name discussion is, I think, to be honest, pretty uninteresting. It's a way more interesting way of talking how can you take a look at the concept and convert it to a real toolbox for your own company at your own setting in your own environment. And that at least is what I'm here for.
Great. I cannot disagree with that at all. Please again, Tim.
Just my last point on this. Some learning that we've had a couple of months ago. We did a complete after-action review of our implementation of Beyond Budgeting. And for those that are about to start on the journey, one of the mistakes we felt we made was that we used the word budget in the name of the project or the implementation or whatever. And we thought, actually, if we'd used a different name, then people wouldn't have been straight on the back foot about this whole budget subject. So for those of you that are about to start on this journey, think about, I mean, you had a very good name for your project. I think last year we talked about it. But think about the name, because it's quite important. Actually, it came back and did cause a bit of resistance for us just because we used the budget. Because we know it's more than just budgeting and things like that. But so that would be my feedback to the group.
I fully agree. I mean, I generally advise people who want to start on this journey to avoid the word budget in their project. I mean, talk about performance, agility, other stuff. That's a great point. Thanks a lot. I'd very much like to move on to the next planned part of this session. As I mentioned this morning, we have been very fortunate that a lot of people among our members have contributed with new insights into the topic that we're talking about. And one of those was a very inspiring case report. I think we call it a research paper, co-authored by Marit, who's standing here, about similarities between Agile and the stuff that we're talking about and beyond budgeting. And based on your experiences, a lot of interesting insights have come out. So I've asked Marit to give a short version of this research paper. For those of you who have attended the implementers meeting yesterday, it coincidentally overlaps with some of what we talked about, but coming from a very different angle. So I hope you'll find this interesting. Marit, please.
So the research paper is titled as From Cost Management to Content Management. And there are a few megatrends in the world, and software is one of those. So software is coming more and more in every kind of product and everything what we do. And the other megatrends that are actually currently there, one is the globalization and the other one is digitalization. And I think that's why the topic today is very, very important and a challenge. So my background is that I spent 20 years in doing different kind of products in Nokia Networks and in Nokia, and led different organizations, different projects there. And last 6 years from 2007 on, I was the main responsible for Agile and Lean transformation. I'm also one of the Scaled Agile Framework contributors, so actually this stuff, what we did about finance, it is now part of the Scaled Agile Framework 3.0. as well. So there is the budgeting coming. And for 10 years, I've done research on, more than 10 years, I've done research on agile methods in large-scale software development organizations. So I started year 2004 to study if agile methods can be used in large scale, and that ended after 10 years of doing long hours and weekend work as a dissertation. This is the world's first dissertation in agile in large scale. And now I'm working as a consultant and trainer. So this is the technology adoption curve, originally by Geoffrey Moore. I think you all know this, and this is the major question for anybody doing product development. How can we get into this this area where you have a lot of positive growth? And if you are up there, so if you are the dominant, world dominant, there may be a temptation of adding more control and processes in order to, maintain your position. But actually what you need to do in order to get here is to have some radical innovation. And I think this is where beyond budgeting comes into play. And that's why people are so interested nowadays in these lean startups, because lean startups is talking about the same thing, how to get there to radical innovation. In fact, Geoffrey Moore says that you should think about this as a stream, so that there is a stream coming from here, and if you don't do anything, your product is getting outdated, and you kind of go down to the curve. And you have to do what he's calling neutralizing innovation in order just to stay where you are. And if you want to go up here, you have to do the radical innovation. So what is the common ground for beyond budgeting and agile is how we approach this uncertainty. And you know that if you look at the traditional project management, there's the cone of the uncertainty, explaining that whatever estimate you have for your project, you have to multiply it by 4. But I think what is behind the beyond budgeting is that we just acknowledge that there is this uncertainty, and we do the rolling planning, and we don't want to place our pets too early, and learning on the way is very important. Usually this comes as a radical idea, and when I talk with them, I usually tell the story about the Deep Blue. So Deep Blue was a chess playing machine. The IBM had all the logic and all the money in the world to build it, and they wanted to build a huge logic. And what happened when Garry Kasparov had the first chess playing game against the Deep Blue? Garry Kasparov won. So how can this be possible? So there was this Italian mathematician called Tesauro, and he said that there is something fundamentally wrong how we approach this problem if we can't solve it by adding more and more calculations and more logic. So usually the chess players, they think ahead like the best ones in the world, the humans. They think like 7-8 moves before what they kind of different combinations what could happen. And this Deep Blue was able to calculate 64 different moves up front, and still Garry Kasparov was able to win. So Tesauro was saying that there is something very wrong, and what he basically did was he was one of the world's best backgammon players. So he developed a program that was able to learn from his opponents how to play backgammon, and for half a year he led the program to play against the world's best backgammon players, and of course failed until it was invincible. So that's the power of learning. And so this is the traditional trap that we create ourselves. We create the project budget, and we try to imagine what the project is, and we divide it into cost centers, and we do a lot of labor reporting the costs against what has been planned and trying to track the progress. And in fact, what we create ourselves is this kind of system where we set a target, and then we measure the gap between what's planned and where we are. And if you look this from electronics point of view, this is actually a negative feedback loop. And a characteristic of a negative feedback loop is that it can never deliver more than what was originally planned. Whereas in Agile and also in Beyond Budgeting, I think what we create is a positive feedback loop. And when you have a positive feedback loop, you just measure where you are and how much progress you have done and where you are going to. And that is basically going to the infinity. So that's why you can get these plus 300% better than before kind of results. Traditionally, when you look about what we want to do in the project, we start by figuring out what's the content we want to create, and we estimate the schedule and the resources. In Agile, we basically say the resources or the people, they are the people that we have. And we want just to have a short period of time, like next month or so, or next 2 weeks. And then we figure out what we can do over there. And that's flexible. And we trust the people that they can play this game in an efficient way. So it's based on the empowerment of people. Traditional projects typically have a very long specification phase. They try to figure out in detail what this project is all about, what this product is all about, what we are creating. How to avoid that, how to allow people to be flexible is basically the question is the same, that how do we actually scale as a humans. And if you look to nature, think about time, for example, we scale as fractals. So pyramids are thousands of years old. We measure the existence as thousands of years. We measure humans' life as years, and the butterflies, they only live like days. So the same idea can be used here. So you first just specify roughly what your product is all about, and then you add the details like the smaller rocks and the sand while you go there. And maybe you recognize this. This is the story behind is the famous story about how to manage your time. You need to figure out first what's the most important stuff and fill that with the calendar, because if you add all the details, you cannot add the most important stuff later on. So put the big rocks first. And the epic feature user story structure is a fractal structure, and that's the way how scaled agility is now defining requirements. So the epics are the big rocks, the features are the pebbles, and the user stories are the sand. And what we figured out once we had this kind of structure to let people to be empowered, we figured out that actually this budget game was unnecessary thing at all, because we had what you actually look for. This budget is a structure of control, and if you already have this kind of structure, how people communicate with each other and how they create the whole system together, you don't actually need this artificial budget structure. And so we decided to abandon that. And we respected the Beyond Budgeting principles, so we separated the forecasting. So we had a rolling forecasting, and then we built the tracking on the actual progress that people were reporting by just closing the task that they had done. So reporting came as a byproduct of the real work done, and that's what I think it should be. I think reporting itself doesn't generate any revenue, so in lean terms it's waste, and it should be a byproduct of the other things that we do. So this is how it changed. So instead of having cost centers and not visible where the money actually was spent, and from the portfolio level that how much revenue was generated, we actually generated this much more detailed view on where the money actually was put. So those were the real products, and that is actually giving to the portfolio level an ability to steer the portfolio in a different ways. So let's say if you are in short of money and you have to cut some funding from future things, if you have this kind of structure, the only thing that you usually can do is to use some sort of cheese cutter. So you cut a little bit from everybody, which is basically essentially creating bottlenecks to the organization. The problem is you don't know where those bottlenecks are. Whereas here, basically, you can put your money where it benefits the most. So this kind of positive feedback. And this is from Jeffrey Moore's Escape Velocity, why this is so important. When we look about organizations' portfolio of products, you can have these high growth categories, low growth categories, and those who are growing and those which are declining. And most of the organizations, they have a big bubble here, which is kind of the main product. And that's getting most of the money. And that's very easy because typically the discussion is that if you invest one euro here or $1 here, you get 2 back. You have a little bit research programs. They just spend a little bit money. You don't get any money back yet. And typically this segment 2 is non-existent. And that's because it's very hard for these projects to compete with these ones. Why is that? Because if you invest here €1, you get 0.7 back. And Jeffrey Moore says that we should actually lead these different projects in different ways. These you should lead with time-based, so give a research program a certain time to prove the concept. This you can run with OPEX, so try to make most out of the money that you have to invest there. And this you should run with CapEx, so just put your investments there and see if the market is generated. And now if you have this kind of visibility that is coming you for free, then you are able to look for different things. You can better enable these growth strategies. This is very important because also the rate at which we can capitalize the former innovations, that time is getting shorter and shorter all the time. And we need to create environments where creation of new innovations is possible. Yeah.
Thanks, Marit. And I have to say that I have become a big fan of Agile. The first time I understood, or somebody tried to explain to me many years ago what Agile was about, and the guy used the following metaphor or story. Imagine that you have 2 different projects to be solved. The first project, in that first project, the task is to develop the best soup in the world. So that's the task. And of course, that is a task with a lot of uncertainty. How much long is this going to take, and what will it cost, and what will kind of the ingredients be, and so on. So a lot of uncertainty, and you need a lot of innovation. Then you have another project. Let's assume that we have been able to find the recipe for the best soup in the world, and the job is to produce 100 identical portions of this soup. And would we dream about applying the same project methodology for these 2 kind of projects? And of course not. But that is actually the problem, because that second task is about replication, manufacturing. And what has been a disaster for IT and R&D for many years earlier was that we took kind of the methodologies for manufacturing and replication and tried to enforce it into areas where you need a lot of uncertainty, where there's a lot of innovation because there's a lot of uncertainty. And and there are so many kind of touch points here between Agile and beyond budgeting. And I think one reason why the Agile community is very interested in beyond budgeting is that, I mean, it's amazing things what they have been able to do in developing Agile as kind of the new standard for doing software development in the IT community. They have come very far, but what they have discovered is that they can be as agile as they want in their development level and in their IT community. But at one level, they're going to hit the big system. And if that is constructed around very different principles, then there is a problem. So these days, I get more information to talk at agile conferences than at finance conferences and HR conferences. And I simply love it for many reasons. One reason is that, you know, talking about beyond budgeting, small or big, and big being including the whole people and leadership side. In that agile community, I mean, those guys fully get all of it. They completely understand and appreciate and love also the big leadership side of this. When I'm talking at finance conferences, I mean, a lot of people are kind of fine as long as we talk about rolling forecasting KPIs. The moment you move into this people stuff, then it's... by the way, there's one very easy way to check for me if I for a minute should forget up on the scene what kind of audience is it? Is it finance or agile or whatever? My simple check being on the front is how many iPhones are up there taking pictures. Because I recall speaking at that first Agile conference in Finland many years ago, all these people taking pictures. And I thought, I mean, don't these people know that I'm going to share the slides with them afterwards? But of course, afterwards was too late. They wanted immediately to share this with the rest of the world. So my kind of simple test is kind of looking at all the flashes from the audience. My wife sometimes joins me on conferences, and then she's sitting in the back. And her simple test on knowing what kind of conference she is at, that is simply to look at the ponytails. Because there are so many of these male agile guys, they have ponytails. So that's her little test but just to end this spontaneous response here, we talked about names and labels, and for me, beyond budgeting is actually about the agile enterprise. That's actually what we are after all. So again, this is an example of two communities kind of fighting the same enemy from different kind of places and starting points. The more we can join forces, the stronger we can be. So if this thing agile is, if you're a bit cold on it, when you're back in your organization and if you have an IT function in your company, check out if they are into agile. And the likelihood is very, very high, and you can have some great discussions with people who will understand and be interested in what beyond budgeting is about. So, and after you've done that, then you should of course have the same talk with your HR people. I find, unfortunately, some HR people, or many HR people, unfortunately, struggle or are less interested in beyond budgeting, unfortunately, than what the agile community is. So, again, Marit, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bjarte, for those words on agile. Any thoughts, reflections on what Bjarte just said, or what Marit went through with us? If not, we're happy to move on. Okay, but again, thanks a lot, Marit. It's great. Moving into the finance stuff. I mean, we cannot avoid the finance stuff completely. I know one thing that Bjarte has been thinking about, very specific thing when it comes to our forecasting. And Bjarte, if you want to come back again. So moving back into finance, so I hope that those of you outside finance can forgive us for a second.
This part is actually planned. The previous thing was not planned. That was more spontaneous. But now this is, I mean, it feels a bit strange after having that big, important discussion about what is beyond budgeting and the kind of, I'm going to go very narrow now, and I'm going to talk about forecasting. And it's an issue that I've kind of pondered a little bit around because, as some of you will know, at Statoil, we did not go into the rolling forecast route. We thought about doing that, and of course rolling forecasting is typically about updating your forecast every quarter and looking 5 quarters ahead, typically. So there's a frequency of every quarter, and there's time horizon of 5 quarters. And as some of you will know, we found that the variety in our business was kind of too broad. So it didn't make sense to kind of force everybody into that frequency and that time horizon. For some it would be too often, too short, and for some the opposite. So we went for, some of you know, dynamic forecasting, updating our forecasts when stuff happens and as far ahead as relevant. But another kind of element of that has to do with kind of this, I call, if you go for quarterly or rolling forecasting, then the decision you also make is that you are going to put your forecasting numbers in quarterly buckets, right? So in a rolling forecast, there are typically 5 numbers, right? 1 number for each quarter. And I'm not sure how conscious that decision is, that quarterly buckets is the right size to kind of put those forecasting numbers into, but that's very often what you see in rolling forecasting. And can you do rolling forecasting without kind of that being the bucket size? And again, as some of you will know, in our dynamic approach, forecasting approach, we have kind of, even if we want to escape the calendar year, we still we have decided to stay with annual buckets. So the size of our bucket that we put forecasting numbers into is still annual. And that is actually not a big problem for us. Because you can still be dynamic on how often do you update the buckets, the numbers in that annual bucket, and how many buckets are you putting numbers in when you forecast. So how far ahead are you looking? So I just, we don't need to conclude on anything or whatever, but I just want to reflect that you reflect in your own forecasting on not just how often shall I update, how far ahead should I look, but also what should the size of my forecasting bucket be. Because I think we kind of ended up a bit on autopilot that typically those buckets are has a quarterly size. Might be okay, but maybe not. So I think you can be rolling and still have different sizes on that bucket.
Thanks again, Bjarte. I think it makes a lot of sense to think about this. It's also my experience that a lot of companies, a lot of finance organizations have done this on autopilot. And it creates a lot of extra work. So we should all of us at all times think about the stuff we do and if it creates value or not. Some companies update their forecasts monthly, which may make sense. And they are also on autopilot very often. So they take the next 18 months forecast or whatever period they have, and they break it into monthly buckets. And just think about the work that goes into this. So I think we should all carefully consider this. So this is just an insight from one of our active and members. Please.
Well, I would just like to follow up on that one. What we have done the last, I would say 6 months in our company is that we have totally revised our model for prognosis and forecasting. We have reduced the figures a lot. We are down to... I'm a part of the Reitan Group. I work in Uno-X Energi, which is a daughter company within the Reitan Group in Norway. Quite big company in Norway, but we are on our own as a daughter company, doing our own stuff. What really happens when you increase the intensity of the forecasting is that the people responsible for doing the forecasting are getting a really, really strong ownership on the numbers. As long as they are few and they can relate to them, it increases the quality a lot. I did on Monday before coming here, we made the prognosis. I sent a short email. It's time, guys. It's the month end. It took them 1.5 hours to make the numbers, put them all together, and ended up in a total for the company. And what we have seen the last 6 months is that the quality of the forecasting has increased a lot. So I must say I'm in a favor of increasing the intensity of forecasting, as long as you are willing to reduce the amount of work and energy put into it. Because it's not about putting the whole financial statement up on the table. It's that you have to be pretty honest, brutally honest about what you need to focus on in the forecast, and that the people actually can relate to it. And then the effect is that the people will have the right focus, and they will be they will feel strongly connected to the figures they're putting in. So that's just my brief reflection on the matter.
Great. Thank you very much for that contribution. It resonates completely with what is my experience. I mean, I know this goes against, I think, maybe not human nature, but financial nature, I would say, or the nature of financial people, is that you can get a much better forecast, much better precision with much less details. And fully agree. Tim, you want to say something as well?
Just as on the topic of frequency, for us, we have it every quarter, of course, but the important thing for us is actually to drive the process to get the numbers out in the forecast that we're trying to improve upon. So having the frequency every quarter helps us to push the organisation to rerun that process, to look at the numbers again. And I think once that process becomes more embedded in the organisation, then it'll be a lot easier for us to actually change the frequency that we need to do the forecast. But our main focus is actually the process within the organisation, the external input and all that kind of stuff. That's the vital bit for us.
Great. One more?
Yeah. Just I have to comment on that, because there are many different approaches to this, and I understand that we're coming from different sizes, small companies, big companies, different industries, and so on. But I wouldn't even describe forecasting as a process. I would just describe it as something natural you should do as part of who's responsible for it. It's an integrated small part of what you're actually doing. It's a snapshot about where we are going. What is way more important is the decision you take upon what you're seeing, where we're going. So we are not allowed to, in our company, to use the word process. I'm not a process fan. This is just something you do, and it's a short snapshot, and then move on based upon that figures you put out from the forecasting.
Great. Bjarte? Okay.
I agree, and the best forecasts are those that you do for yourself in order to manage yourself compared to if you're only doing it for somebody else. But my kind of bucket view here was not a view on frequency, right? Because it's that's a separate discussion. When we on frequency we say dynamic, and dynamic means at the right time. For some it might be very often. For some it might be, the opposite. So I was only pointing to this third discussion, not how often, not how far out, but how big buckets you're putting into your money. And for us to kind of go into splitting this up into quarterly buckets, we think it doesn't make sense. But I fully agree. There's just one purpose of forecasting, and that is decision making. Right? We do this to kind of help us to make better decisions. All right. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Bjarte. If there are no other great comments or insights, I would very much like to end this session with giving the word to Steve, who's at the back. Steve is representing our network, running the BBRT in North America, and I would very much like Steve to share with us what's happening in your network.
To the front of the room, since y'all are all our customers, it might be appropriate to symbolize it this way. It's a pleasure to be here in Europe, to come over and see the energy and the group and see the movement. I would invite any of you with North American subsidiaries to put them in contact with us. We'd love to have them come and participate. Our next North American event is coming up in November, about a month from now. It'll be November 17th and 18th. We'll be in San Antonio, Texas, home of the Alamo. If you don't know what the Alamo is, see me afterwards. I'll fill you in fully. But Holt Caterpillar is going to be hosting the meeting. They're the fourth largest Caterpillar dealership in North America. and they eliminated budgets in 2009. When the world went crazy at the end of 2008, the first thing most of them cut was capital expenditures, and since they sell capital equipment, they took it on the chin. We had been in discussion with them for about 3 years. They were interested, intrigued in what we talked about, but couldn't quite get over the hump. They couldn't quite move on. But when the world went crazy, they said it was time. Don't let a good crisis go to waste. So they eliminated their budget at that point in time, and they did it very innovatively. They borrowed their bankers' boardroom. A lot of people say, how do you convince the bankers to let you do this? Well, if you're in a financial crisis, borrow their boardroom, and they'll certainly set up the discussion. And they basically told all their managers, we can't figure out what the budget should be, so we're not going to finish it. We want you to go out there and just do the best you can. It's very simply that approach, do the best you can. And we're going to just keep communicating and talking to each other. We want everybody to try to optimize what you see and try to close the business you can, try to go after it. Let's talk, let's figure out. And they went through the rest of 2009 that way. And Paul said every time they would make sales and make money, he'd put a little back for the bonus, but they literally ran without a plan. And he said it was phenomenal how well people performed, far better than anybody had ever dreamed. And 2010 wasn't a lot better, so they went along and did the same thing and continued. And again, phenomenal. By 2011, the oil and gas business has begun to come back, particularly in South Texas. The Eagle Ford Shale had came in. There was a lot of fracking operations, and all of a sudden business had picked back up. And people got back to more kind of a new normal and said, Paul told me, Paul, the chief financial officer, said his managers started coming up to him asking him when they're going to get their budgets back. And after he got the question 3 or 4 times, he went over and talked to the chief operating officer, and they discussed it. And he came back and told them, you're never getting them back. They said, what do you mean? Things have gotten back to normal. Aren't we going to get them back? He says, why would we give them back? Look how much better we perform than any of us dreamed were possible. He said, Steve, for 22 straight years, we always beat our budget, we always beat our forecast, and the only thing we ever learned from that is we were really good at sandbagging. And if you're always in that situation, that's their situation. They're going to host. We're going to get an update on them. We'll also have 2 other deep dive case studies going on at that meeting. We'll talk about the story of Group Health Cooperative. Group Health Cooperative is an interesting story. It's a healthcare organization up in Seattle, Washington. One of our adopters in 2007 went along very well, had the CFO involved, had all his lieutenants involved. But like a lot of the healthcare sector in North America, it is in a lot of trouble. And we had a situation where the executive team got cold feet, most primarily the chief executive officer. And his basic concern was they weren't cutting costs fast enough to deal with the economic reality. So he decided that they needed to reverse course. His CFO disagreed with him and resigned. And over the next 6 to 12 months, virtually everybody else in the planning group left as well. So we'll hear about a case study that doesn't end successfully. And so I think one of the things we have to always be open to learning from is situations where the results are different than what you'd hoped for. The results, everything doesn't always come out rosy. So we find these are some of the best learning experiences that we'll have. So we'll have 2 of the lieutenants that were heavily involved in that. One from the front line, Mike DeLuca. The other, his boss, VP of Finance, Scott Boyd, and they'll come and tell you kind of what it's like when management decides to go a different direction. And we think it's going to be one of the more interesting cases that we'll have. The third one is TW Telecom. TW Telecom began implementing in 2004. By 2007, they were rocking and rolling, and they have had a very, very successful run. They're currently being acquired by Level 3 Communication at about a 35% premium over the stock price. But one of very, very successful case studies, and we'll be going deep dive into those 3. In addition to that, the agenda includes a couple of other notable things. We will have Doc Hall, Robert Hall, the former editor of Target magazine, one of the country's leading founders of the lean movement, one of the early chroniclers, and certainly have helped us chronicle a lot of the correlation between beyond budgeting and lean. Doc is retired from writing the magazine, but he has a new effort now and a new book called Compression. And Doc will be coming and talk about how we're going to live in a smaller footprint. Because if we don't live in a smaller footprint, the planet's going to get consumed too quickly. So we'll have Doc talking about compression. We'll follow that with a workshop on scenario playing, where we'll talk through a lot of the what ifs could happen, and if they do happen, what will we do about it? and we'll finally end up with a discussion on incentive compensation, because in North America, we're all about the compensation. And if you don't have a budget to tie it to, what are you going to do instead? So Mark Kodak will be taking us through some different value-based measures. Urge any of you who've got interested to come see me afterwards. I'd be happy to get you an invitation to come join us. One other little thing I forgot to mention. I said Holt Caterpillar is going to be hosting. The Holt family is the Peter Holt's family. Peter Holt is the owner of the world champion San Antonio Spurs. So on Monday night, we'll also be going over to see the Spurs play the Philadelphia 76ers. So if you're a fan of basketball, we got the entertainment squared away for that evening. So please join us for that. In terms of just an update on North America, I will tell you right now, healthcare is our hottest interest sector. We've got more things going in healthcare because we are so screwed up in healthcare. We spend more money for bad results than any country on the planet. And we're trying to figure that out, and we've passed a bunch of laws, and now we can't decide whether we're going to enforce the laws or reverse the laws. We can't decide who the customer is. We can't decide who to pay. And we have a lot of money going out, and we're just really upside down in many different sectors. As a result, many hospitals and hospital chains are joining the round table trying to say, help me, how do we think our way through that? So in the last few months, we've had Dartmouth-Hitchcock join, Denver Health and Hospital Authority, Wyoming Medical Center, Stanford Hospital and Clinic, the main teaching hospital at Stanford University, join a number of others. We have a teaming alliance with the ThedaCare Center for Healthcare Value. ThedaCare is a Wisconsin-based health system that's probably the country's leading authority in lean, and we're teaming with them and teaching it as part of the lean curriculum. If you eliminate waste in healthcare, if you move to a lean approach, how does Beyond Budgeting fit with that? So we've teamed with them. ThedaCare has eliminated their budgets a couple of years ago, and so we're moving very forward with that. I mentioned earlier Mike DeLuca. Since Mike's no longer working at Group Health Cooperative, we've employed him to join us as our healthcare director. So he's helping me support a lot of these different healthcare organizations. And we're working to add some additional resources. What we're finding in North America is they love talking to us, and the more people that have been there and done that they can talk to in our leadership, the more eager they are. So we're reaching out and actively adding people that have taken people through implementations and have actually lived it. There's one I'm very close to announcing, but if I announce it here, it won't happen, so I won't tell you who it is. But we're going out and getting some more people that have been there and done that to help people kind of move forward on what we're trying to do. We've been active in the Agile community thanks to BBRT. We supported the Lean Kanban 2014 conference and have been actively involved in discussions with our IT people. We're also actively pursuing healthcare as another channel in terms of what's out there and the different organizations that we should team with and move forward with. Our press relationships are going very, very well. As Anders mentioned, in May 2014, we had our 4th cover story in the last 4 years in CFO Magazine. CFO Magazine has a readership of around 300,000 people, so it's by far the most influential financial publication other than the Wall Street Journal, which we'll try to work on next. But that cover stories in CFO Magazine mean a lot to us, and we've planted a lot of seeds over the last 4 years. So there's a number of billion-dollar companies that are calling, asking, inquiring, and we're in discussion with them about their implementation and where they are and how we can help assess them. In North America, we're slightly different because we're geographically spread out across a lot of industries and a lot of areas. Typically in North America, when you sign on, we try to take you through a self-assessment where we ask you to tell us about yourself, and we examine you versus the 12 Beyond Budgeting principles. And so we include it in your membership as a diagnostic where you fill out, we respond, and we go back and forth. What are you doing? What do we see as best practice? And then between those two, what's the roadmap that helps you get on the way? And so we're actively involved with many of the members in completing this kind of dialogue, if you will, just to help you get started. So it's a little bit about North America. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Steve, for updating us. As Steve said, any questions, please speak up now or in the break or afterwards. If there are none right now, just again, thanks a lot, Steve. This brings this session to an end. I hope you thought it was useful and interesting. I did. I hope that's the same for you guys. Anyway, it's time for another break. Be back in 15 minutes for the last session of the day. Thank you very much.